Market growth slowdown, price war, and Chinese EV expansion. What does the future hold for EV companies? May be one of the trickiest questions that you could ask these days. Because, more than ever, the transition to greener mobility seems uncertain. Reasons are numerous, but it mostly comes down to the challenges automakers are facing. They hoped for a quick and smooth transition, but all they got was pain and suffering. Can they overcome the current stagnation and deal with these challenges, or maybe it's time to think about other ways to zero emissions, as automakers like Toyota suggest? Let's try to find out. The best way to start is to check where the EV market stands right now, and it's pretty clear that things are far from ideal. After years of rapid market growth that was often over 90% year over year, things settled down and now we are pretty close to declaring stagnation. In America, the first quarter brought the first fall in years, considering that sales were down 15.4% compared to the quarter before. Even the year-over-year change showed nothing more than a minor growth of 2.6%, and that comes at the time when automakers have finally overcome supply chain issues. For the first time, car companies can produce enough EVs, but suddenly they have run out of customers. Governments around the world are trying to boost sales with all kinds of incentives, but it doesn't seem to help much. Moreover, some administrations act radically and even force automakers to sell a certain percentage of EVs, as if they can decide what buyers want. But so far, all these efforts to speed up EV transition remain unsuccessful. Just take a look at what recently happened in the US last year. EPA came up with a pretty ambitious proposal to cut emissions, which would lead to making 2/3 of new cars all electric by 2032. But 1 year later, EPA came up with a new and, we would say, more realistic proposal, which lowered emission requirements to the point where pickups will remain focused on internal combustion for years, if not decades to come. Instead of 2/3, the new goal is to make just 1/3 of new cars electrified by 2032. And that, according to some experts, even includes hybrids. Driven by Tesla's success and those years of rapid growth, legacy automakers along with EV startups went all in with electrification. Companies like Ford, GM, Volkswagen and others presented electrification plans that were fast and smooth. But one puzzle was missing. EVs were and still are very expensive to produce. So most of these companies believe that the fast adoption and therefore high volume sales would lead to making EVs profitable. But that did not happen. If we exclude Tesla, no car maker has ever cracked the EV economy. They neither optimize production nor reach the point of massive sales. So all those billions poured into development bring no results. Today, every now and then we can see a new report about how much money a company lost on a certain EV model. We have found out that Ford lost $36,000 on every F-150 Lightning they sold, with a total loss on EVs of more than $5 billion only in 2023. And with the market slowdown, the point of mass sales and profitable EV production seems further than ever. Automakers can't afford to lose any more money because massive EV sales don't seem like they're around the corner anymore. With the current growth rate, it looks like they can't continue with investment at the same pace. Instead, it's time for consolidation. It's time to take a break, take a deep breath, and figure out what to do next. For legacy automakers, things are pretty clear. With the latest EPA proposal, the only sustainable strategy is to pull a handbrake on EVs and focus on vehicles that bring profit. Ford and GM already did that. Earlier this year, the Blue Oval Company cut the production of the F-150 Lightning and slashed the workforce at the Dearborn plant by 2/3, all in order to cut expenses and save what could be saved. GM did the same thing by postponing its more important EV project, the all-electric Chevy Silverado and GMC Sierra, for the end of 2025. The good thing for legacy makers is that they still have their backs covered, in the way that they still generate huge profits on internal combustion cars, which have become more expensive than ever. Moreover, both companies announced they will be putting more focus on hybrid cars in the following years, which doesn't come as a surprise if we consider that Toyota's decades of hybrid technology development are paying off hugely. The Japanese automaker earned more than $35 billion in the last fiscal year, which is more than double what Tesla earned during the same period. Things are far more complicated in the case of EV startups, as these companies don't have their ICE lineups to cover their losses. They can only rely on fresh capital from new investors. But just one quick look at the stock value seems enough to figure out why no one wants to invest in EV startups anymore. Back in the day, that was one of the most promising investments. Today, EV startups like Rivian or Lucid are money pits, with their massive losses that measure in the billions. Rivian, for example, lost $5.4 billion only in the last year. So don't be surprised that the company's value is now just a fraction of what it used to be just a few years back. Back in 2021, this company was worth $154 billion. Today, it's worth no more than $10 billion, which suggests that the era of bankruptcies is around the corner. Over the last decade or so, China has become a powerhouse in the EV industry and pretty much left Western countries in the dust, not just in terms of the technology and the number of EVs made, but also in terms of by far the most developed infrastructure. Moreover, China's approach to EV development is comprehensive and it goes way beyond EV companies. Chinese companies control at least 80% of world reserves of rare earth elements, which are the most critical components in making batteries for electric cars. Add to that the massive support of the Chinese government, as well as the significantly cheaper workforce, and it becomes pretty clear why Chinese EVs are so cheap. In China, you can buy an EV for less than $5,000, so it's clear that most experts believe that sooner or later, Chinese companies will dominate the EV industry. After all, Elon Musk stated that Chinese EV makers would obliterate Western companies if there were no trade barriers. Indeed, trade barriers are probably the main thing that keeps the Western automotive industry alive. China has been figuring out how to expand to the most important markets, but governments in the West still manage to resist. One of the most recent measures was Biden's decision to impose a new tariff on Chinese EVs. It was believed that Chinese companies would take advantage of bilateral trade agreements between the US and Mexico and establish production in America's southern neighbor. For now, American automakers are safe because the new set of rules imposes not just a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, but also duties on batteries, minerals, and semiconductors. On the other hand, things are way more complicated in Europe, where some Chinese automakers already entered the market, though still without much success. The problem with Europe is that the connection with China is mutual. Key German automakers like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen largely depend on what they sell in China. So, there is a justified fear that new tariffs would provoke retaliation measures from China's side, which is something the European automotive industry cannot afford at the moment. But, despite the massive advance, the situation in China is far from ideal. The market is oversaturated for the simple fact that there are nearly 100 registered EV makers. So China's EV industry is consolidating around a smaller number of robust champions. The top 10 companies hold 80% of the market, so it won't be long before we see most other companies going out of business. The only problem is that even the biggest players struggle at the moment because of their inability to expand to Western markets. BYD, China's biggest EV maker, still sells 95% of its EVs on the domestic market, and it needed a massive financial injection to overcome the sales fall in the first quarter of the year. We can only presume that things with other EV makers are even worse, due to the ongoing price war that deleted profit margins for most of them. For how long Chinese companies can survive in this relentless battle is left to be seen. With everything we've said in this video, it's clear that the global EV industry is in a crisis. How big and how long, it's still unclear, but there is no doubt that we are advancing to the next stage. We only know that the next chapter in automotive history is going to bring even more struggle. Many will phase out, and from this perspective, this primarily refers to startups. As for legacy car makers, they will try to slow down the whole electrification process as much as possible, because for them, that's the only road to sustainability. But that won't mean much if Chinese companies find a way to finally spread across the West. Finally, let's not forget Toyota and its different approach to zero emissions. The Japanese car maker proved everyone else wrong too many times to neglect its alternative green technologies. What is going to prevail eventually is left to be seen. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.